The morning Mae Ramsey discovered that 32 of her best cattle had vanished into the dust of the Texas panhandle, she did not cry, she did not call for a man, and she did not pray. She pulled on her boots, loaded her rifle, and walked out into the pale gold dawn alone. That was Mae's way, and everyone in the small town of Dust Creek, Texas, knew it. It was the year 1882, and the frontier was a hard and unforgiving place for anyone who chose to stand on it. But it was a particular kind of hard for a woman who owned land outright, who ran a cattle operation without a husband, and who had made perfectly clear to every soul within 50 miles that she was not looking for one. She was 27 years old, sun-browned from her work, with dark auburn hair that she kept pinned so tight under her hat that people sometimes forgot how long it was, and eyes the color of creek water in summer, a green so deep it looked almost brown in the shade. She had come into the Ramsey land legally, through her father, Daniel Ramsey, who had died of a chest fever 2 winters past, leaving her the 400 acres, the ranch house, the old barn, the debt, and the cattle. She had paid off the debt herself alone in 14 months, which no one in Dust Creek thought she could do. She had done it anyway. The men in town had come around after that. First, it was Walt Hardin from the feed store, who had the decency to wait until the ink was dry on the final debt payment before suggesting that a woman in her position ought to consider a partner. She had looked at him with those creekwater eyes and told him plainly that she was not looking. Then it was Deputy Clyde Marsh, who brought wildflowers out to the ranch one Sunday afternoon, and Mae had handed them back to him without opening the door all the way and said the same. Then it was Franklin Good, who owned the neighboring property to the north and fancied himself quite the catch, and who had told me that the 2 ranches combined would be something extraordinary. Mae had agreed that the land would be fine, but that she was not a parcel to be merged with anything. She was not looking. She had made it her answer as reliable as sunrise. The people of Dust Creek had come to accept it. Some of them admired her for it. Some of them, particularly the older women at the church, whispered that she would regret her independence once her hair went gray and her knees gave out. Mae let them whisper. She had a ranch to run. But the morning the cattle disappeared, even Mae had to admit that 32 head of shorthorn cattle did not simply disappear from a fenced pasture without a reason. And a reason meant a trail, and a trail meant tracking. And tracking across 40 miles of broken Texas scrub and canyon country was not a job she could do entirely alone with a lame horse. Because that was the second thing she found that morning. Her good roan gelding Copper standing 3-legged and favoring his right foreleg, with a look in his eye that told her plainly he had stepped wrong in the dark. Mae stood in the corral for a long moment, her hand on Copper's neck, doing the arithmetic of her situation. She had one other horse, Old Bessie, who was 21 years old and suitable for gentle pasture riding, and not much else. She had 2 ranch hands brothers named Eli and Thomas Puckett, but Eli had gone up to Amarillo to collect a supply order and would not be back until Thursday, and Thomas had broken his wrist 3 weeks prior and was still healing. She had herself. She had a rifle with 12 rounds, a canteen, dried beef, and the certain knowledge that if she did not find those cattle before they crossed into the canyon breaks north of the Simmer and Draw, she would lose them to the terrain or worse. She was considering this problem with the expression of someone working a complex sum when she heard boots on her gravel path, and looked up to find a man she had seen exactly twice before, once at the feed store, and once at the Dust Creek saloon, where she had gone to settle an account with the barkeep, standing at the edge of her corral fence with his hat in his hands. Perry Carson was 30 years old, though he looked older around the eyes in a way that suggested he had spent a significant portion of those years outside in weather that did not care about him. He was tall, a little over 6 feet, with dark hair that wanted cutting and a jaw that had not seen a razor in about 3 days. He wore a plain brown vest over a blue work shirt, and his boots were the kind that had been resoled at least twice. Good boots, Mae noted, because she had learned that a man's boots told you more about his character than his handshake. He had no particular flash to him. No silver on his spurs, no fancy stitching. He looked like a working man who did not feel the need to advertise. "Miss Ramsey," he said, and his voice had a low, even quality to it, unhurried. "Mr. Carson," she said, because she made it her business to know who was in the county. He glanced at her lame horse, then at the open pasture gate behind her, then back at her. He did not say anything for a moment. "I came out to ask if you wanted work done on that north fence line," he said. "I was over at Good's place yesterday on a contract job, and I could see from his ridge that 2 of your posts are leaning bad, but I am thinking now that might not be your most pressing problem." "It is not," Mee said. He looked again at the open pasture. "How many head?" She studied him for a moment. Perry Carson had arrived in Dust Creek about 4 months ago, which was recent enough that she did not know his full history, though she had heard enough to know that he was a capable hand, that he worked contract jobs rather than staying with any one outfit, and that he had not, so far as she had heard, caused any trouble. She had also heard him described as quiet, which she respected more than people usually understood. 32 shorthorns, she said, sometime in the night. Gate was open. Either the latch failed or someone opened it. Perry Carson looked at the latch. Even from where he stood, Mee could see him reading it the way a man reads a thing that he understands. He walked over without asking permission and crouched down, examining the ground around the gate post with a focus that was professional and unhurried. He stood back up. "Someone opened it," he said. "There is a heel print here on the inside, pressed in where a man would stand if he was holding the gate while the animals went through. And the latch pin is not broken, it is just open." Mee felt something cold move through her chest. Someone had done this on purpose. That changed the arithmetic considerably. "I can help you look for them," Perry said. He said it the same way he might say he could help mend a fence practically, without weight, without the shadow of anything else underneath it. Mee looked at him carefully. "I want to be plain with you, Mr. Carson," she said, because she always was. "I have told every man in this county that I am not looking for a partner of any variety. I am not looking to be courted. I am not looking for a situation. I need cattle found, and if you are offering to help find them, I will accept that help and pay you fairly for it. But that is the extent of what I am offering." Perry Carson met her eyes, and something in his expression was so genuinely uncomplicated that she almost blinked. "That is fine," he said simply. "I have a good horse and I can read ground. That is all you need from me right now. You can tell me the rest of it over the time it takes us to find your herd." Mee held his gaze another moment. Then she nodded once. "Give me 10 minutes," she said, and walked back toward the house to gather her things. She was ready in 8. She came out with her rifle, her saddlebags packed with enough for 3 days in the field, her canteen full, and her best tracking hat, a wide-brimmed thing the color of dust that had belonged to her father. Perry Carson was waiting in the yard with his horse, a big gray quarter horse with a deep chest and a calm eye, already saddled and ready. He had also, she noticed, brought a second canteen and a coil of rope that she had not asked him to bring, but that she recognized as exactly what the situation might require. She saddled old Bessie with the speed and efficiency of long practice, coaxing the old mare gently and speaking to her in the low, steady voice that Bessie responded to. Perry said nothing during this process. He did not offer to help her saddle her own horse, which Mee appreciated more than she could have explained to anyone who had not been in her position. They set out north, following the track that Perry had read from the ground near the gate, a wide, churned path of cattle hooves moving together, which meant they had been moved with purpose, driven rather than simply wandering. Mee rode on the left side of the track and Perry on the right, and they read it together without discussing it, each taking the side that gave them the clearest angle on the sign. Mee noted this too. A man who knew how to share a trail without competing for it was a rarer thing than people supposed. "You know this country north of here?" she asked after about 2 miles. "Some of it," Perry said. "I came through from Tascosa about 8 months ago, and I have been back and forth a few times since on contract work. The canyon breaks start about 12 miles north of your property line. If someone is moving cattle and they do not want them found easy, that is where they would go. That is my thought also, Mae said. There is a man named Cutter Briggs who was running a small operation out near the Ute Creek drainage about 2 years ago. My father had a dispute with him over water rights. Briggs lost the dispute and had to move his operation. He has not been in Dust Creek much, but I have heard his name come up. Perry nodded, filing this away. Any men riding with him? My father said he kept 2, maybe 3 hands. Could be more now. They rode in silence for a time, and Mae found herself noticing things about how Perry Carson occupied space on horseback, the ease of it, the way he sat his horse like a man who had spent so much of his life in the saddle that the two of them had simply worked out an arrangement. He did not fidget. He did not fill silence with noise. He was watching the ground, the horizon, the brush, cycling through the landscape the way a man did who had been trained by necessity to read the world rather than simply move through it. The sun climbed as they rode, and the Texas panhandle spread around them in its vast, particular beauty. The gold of the short grass, the red-orange of exposed clay banks, the violet smudge of distance in every direction. Mae loved this land with a fierceness that she had never been able to fully articulate to anyone, because it was the kind of love that lived in the body rather than in words. She loved it the way she loved the weight of her own boots on the ground, the way she loved the smell of rain before it arrived, the way she loved the particular quality of the Texas dawn. "You have been here your whole life?" Perry asked, and the question surprised her slightly because it was the kind of question that was interested rather than conversational. "My father brought us out when I was 4, she said. "We came from Tennessee. I do not remember Tennessee. This is all I know." "That comes through," he said. She looked at him. "What do you mean by that?" "The way you ride," he said. "The way you look at the country. Some people are always a little bit watching it from the outside like they are visitors. You are not doing that." Mae was quiet for a moment. It was an accurate observation, and it had been made without flattery, which made it land differently than a compliment would have. "Where did you come from?" she asked. "Missouri originally," he said, "then Kansas for a few years, then down through Indian Territory and into Texas. I have been moving around." "Why Dust Creek?" He was quiet for a moment. "I stopped moving for a bit," he said. "I have not entirely decided if I am done moving yet." Mae absorbed this and returned to the trail. They were riding through increasingly broken ground now, the flat grass giving way to rolling cuts and dry wash channels, and she let her focus return to the work at hand, which was the most reliable comfort she knew. They found the first real evidence about 4 miles north of the county road, a campsite recently used, with a fire ring that still held warmth in the ash when Perry pressed his palm to it. 3 horses had been tied here, she counted the postmarks, and cattle had been held in a natural corral formed by a bend in the wash. The ground was cut up with hooves. Mae crouched and looked at the drag marks leading north. "They were here no more than 6 hours ago," Perry said. 5, Mae said. "Look at the dew, it was still heavy when they made that last fire. The sun has been up 4 hours. Perry looked at where she was pointing and nodded once. 5, he agreed without any tone of having been corrected. Mae stood up and brushed her knees off and looked north. Somewhere ahead, in the canyon breaks, 3 men or possibly more were moving her cattle toward whatever purpose they intended for them resale in New Mexico territory. Most likely, where they could be rebranded and absorbed into an anonymous herd without raising too many questions. Because that was how cattle theft usually worked out here, and because the law's reach thinned considerably once you got past the Cimarron breaks. "We are going to need to move faster if we want to close the distance before they get into the deep canyon country," she said. "Agreed," Perry said. "But we should be careful about riding up on 3 armed men without a plan." "I have a plan," Mae said. He waited. "There is a ridge above the main canyon approach. Locals call it the Coyote Shelf. My father used to watch his cattle from up there when he was moving them north. If we cut west about 2 miles and take the long arroyo up, We can get above them and see exactly where they are and how many there are before we decide our approach." Perry considered this. "That is a good plan," he said. Mae allowed herself a very small feeling of satisfaction. "I know this land," she said. "That is why I am the one leading and you are helping." "I had gathered that," Perry said, and something in his voice was almost warm, though it had not quite crossed into a smile yet. Mae turned her horse west and rode. The long arroyo was harder going than she remembered. She had not ridden this route in 2 years, since the last time she had taken cattle north, but the walls held the track clear and the going was mostly firm. Perry followed without complaint over ground that would have made a lesser horse nervous, and his gray quarter horse demonstrated the kind of steady nerve that came from a horse with genuine good breeding. Mae found herself thinking that she would ask him where he got the horse, and then caught herself, because that was the kind of small natural wondering that accumulated into conversation, and conversation accumulated into something else, and she was not in that business. She reminded herself of this with the same firmness that she reminded herself of accounts due and fence lines, and set her mind back to the work. They came up onto the coyote shelf just past noon, and Mae was out of the saddle and flat on her belly at the ridge edge before Perry had even fully dismounted. She had her father's spyglass out, a good brass instrument that she had carried in her left saddlebag since the day after the funeral, and she was scanning the canyon floor below. She found them within 20 seconds. 3 men on horseback moving a small herd through the canyon bottom, following the dry creek bed north. She counted the cattle. Her count was 30, which meant 2 were either already sold or had been separated somewhere along the way, and she felt the loss of that like a small, sharp pain and then set it aside. She studied the men. They were moving at a walk, not hurrying, which meant they thought they were not followed. She could not make out faces at this distance, but she could see that the middle rider had a distinctive pale yellow duster coat, and she recognized it. She had seen it once 2 years ago when Cutter Briggs had ridden out to her father's ranch for the final word on the water dispute. It was Briggs, she was sure of it. She passed the glass to Perry, who had come up quietly beside her. He looked for a long moment, sweeping the canyon. 3 riders, he confirmed, all armed. They are not nervous, which means they have done this before or they do not expect pursuit. They did not count on me finding the trail this fast, Mae said, pulling the glass back. They probably expected I would spend the morning trying to find a man to help me and lose half a day. Perry glanced at her sidelong. The look was brief, but she caught it. "What?" she said. "Nothing," he said, "just thinking that they assessed the situation incorrectly." Mae tucked the glass away. "Here is the problem. I can go down into the canyon and confront 3 armed men, which is a situation I do not prefer. Or I can wait for them to come out the north end of the canyon, which takes about 2 hours from where they are, and get around ahead of them to the canyon exit. At the exit there is a narrow slot, barely enough for 2 cattle abreast, and the walls are 10 feet high on both sides. If I am in position there before they arrive, I have the high ground and a defensible position." Perry said quietly. Mae looked at him. "If we are in position there," he said. She studied him for a moment. She was not accustomed to someone inserting themselves into her plans in a way that felt collaborative rather than presumptuous. The distinction was subtle, but it was real, and she registered it. "If we are in position," she agreed. They made it to the canyon exit with time to spare. The slot was exactly as Mae had remembered it, a natural narrowing in the red sandstone walls, where the creek exit funneled down to a gap no wider than 12 feet, with walls rising sheer on both sides. Mae went up the right wall, using the handhold she had used as a girl when her father had brought her out here on long summer rides, and told her that knowing the land was the same as knowing yourself. Perry went up the left wall without being told to, reading the situation naturally, and they settled into their positions and waited. The waiting was the hard part. Mae had always found waiting to be a test of a different kind of courage than action. the kind that required you to sit inside your own head without fidgeting or catastrophizing. She listened to the canyon. Somewhere in its upper reaches, a canyon wren was singing its descending, liquid call, and the sound of it was so achingly familiar that she felt the grief of her father move through her in a wave, quick and clean and gone. She was aware, in the silence, of Perry Carson on the opposite wall. She could not see him, but she could hear, occasionally, the small sounds of his presence: a boot shifting on rock, the controlled exhale of a careful breath. She found herself marking those sounds the way she might mark the sounds of the land itself, cataloging them as information about her environment, and she noticed something in herself noticing them and told herself firmly to concentrate. They heard the cattle before they saw them, the particular rumble of hooves on rocky ground, the low sounds the animals made, the jangle of tack on horses. Mee got her rifle settled and her breathing steady. She had not come here to shoot anyone if she could avoid it. She had come here to make it entirely clear that shooting was an available option, which was usually sufficient. The first cattle came through the slot, moving with the resigned resignation of animals being pushed from behind, and then the first rider appeared, a young man, not more than 22, heavyset, with a carbine across his saddle. He saw me on the wall before she had to say a word, and his face went through surprise into alarm, so fast it was almost comical. He grabbed for the carbine. "I would leave that where it is," Mee said, and her voice had the quality of someone who means precisely what they say, no more and no less. The young man's hand stopped. He looked up at her, taking in the rifle she held with easy competence, and then looked across at Perry on the opposite wall and understood the geometry of the situation. "Where is Cutter Briggs?" Mee said. The young man said nothing. The cattle were milling in the slot now, confused by the stopped movement, and the sounds behind them told me that the second rider was close. Sure enough, the pale yellow duster came through the slot, and Cutter Briggs pulled his horse up short and looked at the walls on both sides, and his face did not go through surprise the way the young man's had. It went through a cold calculation that Mee recognized as more dangerous. Briggs was somewhere in his mid-40s, lean and weathered, with a mustache going gray and eyes set deep under heavy brows. He looked at me for a long moment. "Mae Ramsey," he said, and his voice was flat. "Your father's daughter." "My own self," Mee said. "These are my cattle, Mr. Briggs, as you know perfectly well, and you are going to turn them around and drive them back south." "Now, Miss Ramsey," Briggs started, in the tone men used when they were about to explain to a woman why her clearly correct understanding of the situation was incorrect. "Before you continue," Mee said, "I want you to understand that I have already sent a rider to Sheriff Alderman in Dust Creek with a full account of this situation and your name in it." This was not strictly true. She had not sent anyone because there had been no one to send. But it was the kind of statement that could not be immediately disproved, and it had the effect she wanted. Briggs' calculation shifted. "And you should know that I grew up shooting in this country, Mr. Briggs, and this rifle does not make me nervous the way it might make some people nervous." There was a long silence. The third rider, she could hear now, had pulled up somewhere behind Briggs, uncertain. The young man in front was sweating. Then Briggs looked across at Perry on the opposite wall, and Perry met his look with a quiet, steady attention that communicated without drama that he was not going anywhere and that the situation was what Mee had said it was. Briggs' shoulders dropped a fraction. It was the smallest possible signal, but Mee read it perfectly. "Turn them around, boys," Briggs said. They drove the cattle back through the canyon, which was a slow and somewhat chaotic process, because cattle do not like being turned in a narrow space, and they expressed this through noise and bumping and general complaint. Briggs and his two hands, the young one and the third, a thin older man who had said nothing through the entire encounter, were subdued and businesslike, following Mee's directions with the compliance of people who understood that the available alternative was worse. Perry rode beside her as they came back out the south end of the canyon, the herd ahead of them, and the three rustlers spread out to the sides, keeping the animals moving. The afternoon sun was coming in low and orange now, turning everything warm. Me's legs were tired, and her shoulders ached from the tension of the slot canyon position, and she was quietly, deeply relieved that it had gone the way it had gone. "You said you sent a writer to the sheriff," Perry said, and his tone was not accusatory, simply noting. "I did not," Me said. "I do not have anyone to send." "I figured," he said. "It worked anyway." "It usually does," she said. "Men like Briggs are not brave so much as opportunistic. The moment the opportunity gets complicated, they recalculate." Perry was quiet for a while, then, "That was well handled." Me looked over at him. "You sound surprised." "I do not think I sound surprised," he said. "I think I sound like a man saying that was well handled." She held his gaze for a moment, and something shifted in the air between them, something so small and quick she almost missed it, like the first breath of wind before a storm changes direction. She looked back at the cattle. "I said I would pay you fairly," she said. "You do not need to," he said. "I said I would," she said, in the tone that ended that particular discussion. They brought Briggs and his men back to the point where the cattle had been taken, and there, in the long late afternoon light, Me delivered herself of a clear and thorough accounting of the legal and practical consequences that would follow if any such thing were attempted again. She also told Briggs that she was going to write a full account of the day's events and leave it with the sheriff regardless, so that there was a record. Briggs listened to all of this without quite meeting her eyes, and then rode away south with his men, and Me watched them go with the steady attention of someone who intends to follow through on exactly what she has said. The ride home was long and companionable in a way Me did not examine too closely. The cattle moved well in the cool of the early evening, following the home trail as cattle did when they knew it, and Me and Perry rode on opposite flanks, keeping them together. The sky went from orange to rose to deep purple, and then filled itself with stars, thick and brilliant in the way they only got out here away from any town lights, and Me found herself riding in a silence that did not feel like absence but like the presence of something quiet and good. "Your horse is better than your cattle count," Perry said eventually, nodding at Bessie, who was managing the miles with the dignified persistence of a very old professional. Me laughed. It was a short sound but genuine. "Bessie has carried me through worse than this," she said. "How old is she?" 21. "She looks it," Perry said, and this was said with affection rather than criticism, and Bessie seemed to know the difference because she lifted her head slightly. "When Copper is healed, I will have a proper horse under me again," Me said. "I did not plan this trip on Bessie." "Few people plan their hardest trips," Perry said. Me glanced over at him, but he was looking at the stars, and she could not entirely read the tone of that remark, so she let it pass. They got the cattle back through the repaired gate. Perry had brought tools in his saddlebag, which she had noticed earlier and not commented on, and he fixed the latch in the last of the light while she counted the animals twice to make sure her number was right. 29. She was missing 3. She stood in the middle of the herd with her lamp, counting again, and the number stayed at 29. 3 short, she said. Perry was crouching by the repaired latch, brushing his hands on his jeans. He stood up. "The 2 we did not see in the canyon," he said, "plus 1 more somewhere between here and there. Separated somewhere on the trail north," Me said. "Could be they found a break in the fencing and went into the canyon draws on the east side. I will look tomorrow." She paused. "I will look tomorrow," she said again, hearing the first time she had said it differently than the second. Perry heard it too, but he did not make anything of it. "I can be here by sunup if you want a second set of eyes," he said. Me was quiet for a moment. She had operated alone for 2 years, longer if you counted the last year of her father's illness when he had been unable to really work. She knew every reason to say no. She also knew that 3 head were still out in the dark somewhere, and that Copper would not be well enough to ride for at least another week, and that Bessie had done 20 miles today and deserved a rest. "By sunup," she said. He nodded once, collected his horse, and rode out into the dark toward town, and Me stood in the lamplight of her own yard and watched him go and then turned back to her cattle. She was up before dawn, as she always was, and she had coffee on the stove and biscuits in the pan, by the time the eastern sky began to lighten. And she was standing on the porch with her cup when Perry Carson rode up the track in the gray pre-dawn on his big gray horse, and she noticed that he had his tools on his saddle and a coil of wire that suggested he was thinking about the fence lines as well as the cattle search. And she noticed this and did not say anything about it, but she poured a second cup and held it out when he stepped up onto the porch. He took it without ceremony and stood beside her looking at the dawn. They drank their coffee in silence, and the sun came up and painted the flat land gold. "The east draws," Mae said. "Yes," Perry said. They set out. They found the first 2 strays within an hour. They had pushed through a section of fence where an old post had rotted at the base and gone through into the neighbor's dry pasture to the east, which was abandoned land and offered no competition for the thin winter grass. Mae herded them back through the gap while Perry cut and set a new post with the speed and efficiency of someone who had built fence in many places and knew it was mostly a matter of not thinking too hard about it. The third stray took most of the morning. They tracked her through the east draws for 3 miles, following sign in the soft creek bottom, and found her finally in a brushy hollow where she had calved in the night, a birth neither expected. The calf was alive, wobbly and indignant, and the mother was exhausted and defensive and not in the mood for the opinions of humans. Mae came off Bessie and moved toward the cow slowly, talking in the low, steady voice she used with her animals, and spent 20 patient minutes convincing the cow that moving was a good idea. Perry held the horses and stayed well back, reading correctly that this was a one-person task and that the person was already doing it. The calf was small but strong, and it scrambled up beside its mother, and the 2 of them were eventually persuaded to walk back north toward the home pasture. "That is 32 then," Perry said, doing the count in his head. 29 plus the 2 strays plus the new calf. 32 and a half, Mae said. "The calf is very small." Perry smiled at this. It was the first full smile she had seen from him, and it changed his face considerably, took about 5 years off the age around his eyes, and made him look something close to boyish for just a moment before settling back into something warmer and more sustained. Mae looked away from it with slightly more focus than was entirely necessary and concentrated on the calf. They brought the animals home before noon, and Mae paid Perry in full for 2 days' work, which he accepted without argument, and without the particular brand of masculine discomfort that some men showed about being paid by a woman. She appreciated this the way she appreciated the absence of complications in general. "The north fence line," he said, when she handed him the money. "The 2 posts I mentioned yesterday. I know about them," she said. "I have been meaning to get to them. I can do them this afternoon if you want," he said, "at the same rate." Mae considered him for a moment. "You have other work in the county," she said. "The good job is finished," he said. "I do not have anything pressing until next week." "All right," she said. "The north line." He did the north fence line that afternoon, and she worked alongside him, not because she needed to, she could have left it to him, but because she had always worked her own fence line and she did not see a reason to change that. They worked in the comfortable parallel of people who understood the same task and did not need to narrate it to each other, and Mae found herself watching his hands the way he set a post, measured the wire tension, drove a staple, and recognizing the work of someone who had learned by doing and had done a great deal. "What did you do before contract work?" she asked, measuring a length of wire. "Ranching," he said. "I had a place in Kansas." Mae heard the past tense. "What happened to it?" He was quiet for a moment. "Lost it," he said. "Bad year for grass, worse year for prices, and then there was a fire." He said this without drama, flatly, the way a person describes something they had worked through to the other side of. "I had a wife. She had gone back to her people in Missouri by the time the fire happened. That was already over." Mae did not say anything. She let the information settle the way it had been given without making more of it. "I am sorry about the ranch," she said eventually. "It was 6 years ago," he said. "I have made my peace with it." He paused. "I am not looking for sympathy. I just wanted you to know why I move around. I am not running from anything current. I just have not found a reason to stop." Mae heard this and noted it and kept working. That evening, when the fence was done and the tools were put away and the light was going golden and long over the grass, Perry lingered a moment in the yard without quite being ready to leave, and Mae, who was usually very efficient at signaling the end of a working day, found herself lingering also. "There is coffee left from this morning," she said. "I could heat it." "I would not say no," he said. They sat on the porch in the evening, drinking reheated coffee and watching the light change, and the conversation that developed was quiet and unhurried and covered ground that neither of them had particularly planned to cover: her father, his Kansas years, the particular quality of light in this part of Texas, the way the cattle learned patterns if you let them, the difference between a horse that was smart and a horse that was merely fast. Mae found herself talking more than she usually did with anyone, not because she was nervous, but because the conversation had a quality of ease that she associated with good open land, nothing in the way, nowhere that you had to watch your step. Perry did not ask her why she was not looking. He did not seem curious about it in the way that people usually were, the probing, slightly affronted curiosity of people who could not understand why a woman would choose her own company. He seemed to have taken her at her word and put it down somewhere safe and left it there. She respected this so much it made her slightly uneasy. He left before dark, and Mae sat on the porch for a long while after, listening to the night come in, and the coyotes start up in the far breaks, and the cattle shift and settle in the pasture, and she thought about the fact that she was 32 cattle to the good and 3 to the better, and that the fence line was mended and that Copper's leg was healing, and that the day had been, by any fair accounting, a good one. She thought about Perry Carson's smile. She told herself that it was not her concern. Thomas Puckett came back to work the following Monday with his wrist in a brace but good enough for light tasks, and Eli returned from Amarillo with the supplies on Thursday as expected, and Mae's operation settled back into its normal rhythm. She filed a report with Sheriff Alderman as she had promised Briggs she would, and the sheriff, a capable if unimaginative man named Roy Alderman who had been doing the job for 11 years, took down her account with professional thoroughness and told her that he would look into it. She had little confidence that anything would come of it legally, because the cattle had been recovered and Briggs was a careful man, and the law out here moved slowly and selectively, but she wanted the record to exist. She wanted her word on paper in the sheriff's file. Perry Carson came back the following week for a different job. She had hired him to help with the annual accounting and branding of the new calves, which was a 3-day job that required at least 3 pairs of hands, and she had Thomas and Eli, but one more was useful. She told herself she had hired him because he was capable and available, and she had no reason not to, all of which was true. Eli Puckett, who was 24 and observant in the way that younger brothers of older brothers often were, watched Perry work the first morning and then came to find me at the water trough in the afternoon. "That Carson is a good hand," Eli said. "He is," Mae said. "He keeps looking at you," Eli said. Mae gave him a look of such complete neutrality that Eli found something else to attend to for the remainder of the day. But she noticed, after that, in the way that you notice something once you had been given the lens for it. Perry Carson was not obvious about it. He was not the kind of man who was obvious about anything. But there was a quality of attention in the way he tracked where she was on a piece of ground, a readiness in how he moved that was oriented faintly in her direction, the way a plant that is not dramatically reaching for the sun is still doing so in everything it does. Mae observed this with the scientific detachment she brought to most things and continued working. On the 3rd day of branding, in the late afternoon when the work was done, and Eli and Thomas had gone home, and Perry was washing up at the pump, Mae came around the corner of the barn and stopped. The sunset was doing something exceptional, the kind that happened maybe 3 times a year, when the cloud conditions and the angle and the dust in the air combined into something that made the entire western sky look like a painting of heaven done by someone with no restraint at all, in every shade of orange and crimson and gold. The light fell across the yard and turned the dust to copper and turned Perry, standing at the pump with water on his face and his sleeves rolled up, into a figure out of something older and more significant than a Tuesday evening on a cattle ranch. He turned and saw her watching the sky, and he watched the sky too for a moment. "Lord," he said quietly. "It does this sometimes," Mae said, and her voice came out softer than she meant. They stood there in the improbable light and neither of them said anything, and the moment had a quality of completeness to it, like a sentence that ended exactly where it should. Perry dried his hands on his bandana and turned to look at her, and the evening light was not being kind about the fact that his eyes, which she had catalogued as simply dark, were actually a very warm shade of brown, the color of good coffee or old wood, and they were looking at her with the particular quality of attention she had been cataloguing for days now, but had not yet allowed herself to interpret. "Me," he said, which was the first time he had used her given name without the miss in front of it, and the way he said it was careful and quiet, like a man opening a door rather than pushing it. Me looked at him steadily. "I told you," she said, "I am not looking." "I know that," he said. "I meant it." "I believe you," he said. "I am not asking you to be looking." He was quiet for a moment. "I am just telling you that I think about you." "I did not plan to say that, but I think you already know it, and pretending otherwise does not seem like an honest way to conduct myself." Me was quiet for a long moment. The sun was going down fast now, the extraordinary colors collapsing into a deep purple that turned the land mysterious and close. "Why do you think about me?" she said, and the question was not coy. It was genuine, the way all her questions were genuine. She wanted the actual answer. Perry considered it with the thoughtfulness she had come to expect from him. "Because you are the most competent person I have met in years," he said, "and the most honest. And because you make me feel quiet in a way that is not uncomfortable." He paused. "That is the best I can do with it." Me looked at the dying sky. She thought about her father telling her that the land was reliable in a way that people often were not, and that you could love a person the way you loved land carefully, with full knowledge of the difficulty, with the understanding that it would require work, and that the work was part of what made it real. She thought about the fact that she had built her life on her own strength, and that she was proud of that, and that none of it required being alone. She had been conflating the two things, she realized. The independence and the solitude, they were not the same thing. "Perry," she said, "yes. I need you to understand that if this is a thing that is happening, I am not going to change who I am. I'm not going to run this ranch any differently. I'm not going to ask for permission for anything that is mine to decide." "I know that," he said. "I would not want you to. And I am not going to be easy," she said. "I have been on my own for a long time and I have sharp edges." "So do I," he said. She looked at him in the last light. "I am still not sure I am looking," she said. "That is all right," he said. "I am not in a hurry." Something in Me's chest, which had been held tight for a very long time, shifted very slightly. Not open, not yet, but shifted, which was a different thing and perhaps more significant. "Good night, Mr. Carson," she said, and the tone of it was not cold, merely careful. "Good night, Miss Ramsey," he said, and he said it with a gravity and a gentleness that she carried inside with her and did not put down until she was lying in bed listening to the night wind in the eaves of the old ranch house. October came in fast that year, with the first cold front sweeping down out of the north and turning the grass brown overnight and making the mornings sharp with the promise of winter. Me brought in her fall calves and sorted her herd and got her hay stores in order, and worked with the concentrated energy of someone who had learned from experience exactly how much a Texas panhandle winter could demand if you were not ready for it. Perry came and went through the month on various jobs around the area. He was good with horses and with general construction as well as cattle work, and there was always something in a working county that needed a capable and honest hand. He stopped at her place sometimes when he was passing, to check on the fence lines, or look at something she had mentioned needing attention. And these stops always ended up involving coffee and the porch and conversation, and Mae did not make a policy of resisting them. She had looked at herself honestly, which was the only way she knew how to look at anything, and she had admitted that she looked forward to when Perry came by in a way that was not purely practical. She had also admitted that this did not frighten her the way she had always assumed it would. The thing she had been afraid of, she understood now, was not the feeling itself but the particular way certain men had of trying to step into her life as though it were a position that had been waiting to be filled. What she had been protecting herself from was not closeness but presumption. Perry Carson did not presume. He arrived without assuming anything was due to him, worked without requiring direction about where he fit into the picture, and left when the work was done without lingering in a way that asked her to validate him. He was simply present in the way that good land was present, not demanding anything of you, simply available. It was a Saturday afternoon in late October when Mae's neighbor to the west, a widow named Clara Bate Orton, who ran a small sheep operation and had been Mae's closest friend for going on 5 years, came riding up the track and dismounted with the specific air of a woman who has information. "Perry Carson has put a deposit on the old Whitfield property," Clara Bate said, settling herself at Mae's kitchen table with the cup of coffee Mae automatically produced for her. "The 40 acres with the cabin south of the county road," Mae turned from the stove. "The Whitfield place." "The very same." Clara Bate watched her with the sharpest eyes in the county. "Tom Whitfield told my brother that a man came in Monday and put down earnest money and said he would have the full amount by spring. Tom said it was Carson." Mae turned back to the stove. "That is his business," she said. "He is buying land," Clara Bate said. "In this county, that is a man who is not moving on." Mae poured her own coffee and sat down across from Clara Bate and looked at her oldest friend and said, "Clara Bate, I am not in a condition to discuss this." Clara Bate, who had known Mae since the year her father arrived in Dust Creek, and who had watched Mae grow from a small, quiet girl who read everything she could find into a large-spirited and intensely capable woman, leaned back in her chair and said, "Mae Ramsey, you are in a condition to discuss exactly this and you know it. You have been thawing since August." "I have not been thawing," Mae said. "You have been thawing," Clara Bate said gently, "and there is nothing wrong with it. Your independence is not in any danger from a man who respects it. I have watched him with you. He does not try to manage you." "No," Mae said, "he does not." "That is rare," Clara Bate said. "I am aware that it is rare," Mae said. They drank their coffee and the kitchen was quiet and warm and the wind pressed at the window glass outside with the beginning of winter in its voice. "I have been thinking about my father," Mae said eventually. "He loved this land the way I do. And he also loved my mother. He used to say that the land was what you stood on and the love was what kept you from falling over." She paused. "I thought that was just what he said because he was a sentimental man." Clara Bate said nothing, which was sometimes her best quality. "I think maybe he was right," Mae said, "about more of it than I gave him credit for." Clara Bate rode home an hour later, and Mae went back out to her work, and the afternoon turned cold, and she moved through it with the feeling of having decided something without quite having been conscious of making a decision. Perry came by 3 days later, on a Tuesday, with a load of firewood he had cut from the stands of cedar along the dry creek east of the Whitfield property. She noted, and he unloaded it in the yard and stacked it with efficient precision. Mae watched him from the barn doorway and then came out. "You bought the Whitfield place," she said. He straightened and looked at her. "I did," he said. "You are staying in this county." "I am," he said. Mae looked at the woodpile. "That was a kind thing," she said. "The firewood. You have a cold house and a long winter coming," he said. "It seemed practical." "It was," she said, and then before she could organize her thoughts into their usual careful formation, "Come to supper." Perry looked at her for a moment. "Tonight." "Tonight," she said. "It will be nothing fancy, but the food will be good and the company," she paused, "the company will be acceptable." Something moved through Perry Carson's face like sun moving over a field, quick and warm and honest. "Then I will come to supper," he said. The supper was not nothing fancy, because Mee cooked with the same competence she brought to everything else, and the table in the ranch house kitchen was set properly with her mother's dishes that she had carried from Tennessee as a child, and that she used only when something warranted it, which she chose not to examine too closely. They ate venison stew and corn bread and dried apple preserves, and they talked more easily than they had talked before, the conversation moving with the naturalness of water finding its level. Perry told her about Kansas in more detail, the place he had built, the years of work, the drought that had started the chain of difficulties. He talked about it without self-pity and without bitterness, which Mee recognized as the product of genuine processing rather than suppression. He had been through something hard and had come out the other side of it still himself, and Mee understood this because she had done the same thing in a different way. She told him about the 2 years after her father's death, the debt, the loneliness of that first winter, the day she had signed the final payment and stood on her porch in the cold and cried, not from relief but from grief, because it meant the thing she had been working toward was finished and her father was not there to see it. "He would have been proud of you," Perry said. "I know that," Mee said, "but I would have liked him to say it." Perry nodded. He understood the difference between knowing something and having it spoken aloud. He was the kind of man who understood things without being told and said them when they needed saying, and Mee was learning to register this as the specific and unusual quality it was. After supper they sat by the fire, which was a thing Mee had not done with another person in a very long time, and the fire made the room warm and the night outside the windows was cold and dark, and the cattle were settled, and the fences were good and everything was in its proper order, and Mee felt a peace that she had been carrying alone for so long that having it witnessed was a strange and good sensation. "Perry," she said. He looked over at her from the other chair. "I think I might be looking after all," she said. The words came out simpler than anything she had prepared to say, and more honest, and Perry Carson's face did the thing with the warmth and the light and the years going out of his eyes again, and he said, "That is good to hear, Mee." She reached over and put her hand on the arm of his chair, not quite touching his hand but close, and they sat like that in the firelight for a long time, not rushing anything, letting the evening be exactly what it was. The winter came down hard that year, the way Texas winters did when they decided to mean business ice on the water troughs each morning, cold that had a weight to it, a blizzard in early January that kept everyone close to home for 4 days. Perry was well established on the Whitfield property by then, which was 2 miles from Mee's ranch, close enough that he could be there in 20 minutes on horseback, but far enough that it was his own place, his own ground. Mee had visited it once in November and found that he was rebuilding it with the same quiet thoroughness he brought to everything, not flashy, not hurried, just steadily making it into something sound. They spent the winter learning each other in the particular way of people who are serious about the process through difficulty and disagreement as much as through ease. Mee was direct and uncompromising in her opinions and Perry was, she discovered, stubborn in a way that was different from her stubbornness. Where she drove forward in a straight line, he was capable of a kind of patient resistance that could outlast almost anything. They disagreed twice about things that mattered, once about the proper way to handle the situation with Cutter Briggs, who had been quiet but not absent, and once about a decision she made regarding the spring cattle sale that he thought was the wrong price. Both times the disagreement was real, and both times they came through it with their respect for each other intact, which Mee thought was more important than agreement. She told him this directly, one February evening. "I need you to disagree with me," she said. "Not to be contrary, but because if you only ever agreed with me, I could not trust your agreement. I can only trust people who are willing to be honestly wrong with me." Perry looked at her across the kitchen table and said, "I feel the same way, and you are wrong about the Briggs situation." "Explain why," she said. Because sitting on it quietly is giving him the initiative, Perry said. You made a record which was right, but Alderman is not going to move on it without pressure. I think you should go back to the sheriff and push. Mae considered this. You are right, she said. Perry blinked. Just like that. You made a good argument, she said. Being stubborn about the right answer because you found it instead of me would be foolish. He laughed a full, real laugh, and she laughed too. And the winter kitchen was warm, and the snow pressed gently at the windows. And the moment was so ordinary and so fine that Mae held it in her memory for a long time afterward. She went back to Sheriff Alderman in March with Perry beside her, and gave a formal and detailed account of the full situation with Cutter Briggs, including the evidence at the gate post, the campfire, the canyon encounter, and a written statement from Perry, who had witnessed everything. Alderman listened more carefully this time, perhaps because there were two of them, perhaps because the case was now documented with enough specificity to make ignoring it a deliberate choice. He rode out to speak with Briggs 2 weeks later, and returned with a communication that Briggs intended to sell his remaining land claims in the county and relocate to New Mexico. Mae did not know exactly what Alderman had said to him, and she did not ask. The result was what mattered. Spring came with a rush of color, the grasses greening, the wildflowers erupting across the flat land in colors that seemed to have accumulated over the winter and were now spending themselves all at once. Mae's herd had come through the winter in good condition, her calves were strong, and the ranch was in the best shape it had been since before her father's illness. She felt this with a full and grateful pleasure. It was a May evening, just before the long dusk, that Perry came to the ranch house with a quality about him that Mae recognized immediately as intention. He was not nervous, he was not a nervous man, but there was a purposefulness to how he came up the porch steps and turned his hat in his hands that she knew. I have been thinking, he said. About what? She said, though she knew. About asking you something, he said. And I want to be careful about how I ask it, because I know what your answer has been and I want to respect that. And I am not asking you to change what you are or who you are or how you run your life. Mae sat down in her porch chair and looked up at him. The evening sky behind him was exactly the color it had been the first time they had watched it together, in the way the seasons circled back. Perry, she said, ask me. Marry me, he said. Not to take anything from you. Not to run anything for you. Not to be between you and your own decisions. Marry me because I love you, and because 2 good lives can be better than 2 separate good lives, and because I want to sit on this porch for the next 40 years and argue with you about everything and be wrong sometimes and be right sometimes and be beside you in all of it. Mae was quiet for a long moment. She looked at her land, her pasture, the cattle moving in the last light, the barn, the old house with the good boards she had replaced herself, and the new roof she had put on the summer before. She had built this from grief and debt and will, and it was hers completely, and no part of it required a man to make it real. That was exactly why she could say yes. Yes, she said. That is my answer. Perry sat down in the other chair and reached over and took her hand, and this time she let him, and his hand was warm and calloused and sure, and they sat in the May evening and the land lay before them in the long light, and the coyotes began somewhere in the north. And Mae thought that the difference between solitude and peace was the same as the difference between a fence that keeps things out and a fence that simply marks where the good land begins. They married in June, in the little Dust Creek church, in a ceremony that was small and honest in the way that Mae preferred. Clara Bate stood beside her in the best dress Clara Bate owned, and Eli and Thomas Puckett stood in the pews, and Eli cried and pretended he had something in his eye, and Thomas let him pretend. Sheriff Alderman was there, and the feed store man, and various faces from the county who had watched Mae Ramsey do everything on her own for years, and who came to the wedding with the particular warmth of people who are genuinely pleased to see a good thing happen. The minister, a young man recently arrived from Ohio who was still adjusting to the landscape and the people, asked them both if they would take each other as husband and wife in the traditional manner, and Mae said yes in the same clear, unhurried voice she used for everything. And Perry said yes in his low, even way. And the small congregation felt the genuine weight of two honest people making a real promise, which is a rarer and more moving thing than a showy one. After the ceremony, standing in the churchyard with the summer sun hot and bright, and the smell of the grass and the distant cattle and the particular quality of a Texas June in the air, Clara Bate hugged me with the ferocity of a woman who has been waiting a long time for a moment that has finally arrived. "You look happy," Clara Bate said, pulling back to look at her. "I am," me said simply. Perry was talking to Eli about something, standing with his hands in his pockets, and me looked at him across the churchyard, and he turned, as he always seemed to turn when she was looking, and the look he gave her across the hot summer air was quiet and warm and sure, and me held it the way she held good land under her boots, with full knowledge and full will. They had agreed before the wedding that me's ranch would remain me's ranch, hers in name, in operation, in every legal sense. Perry's Whitfield property, which he had worked through the winter and spring, and which was becoming something genuinely good, was his. They were two ranches that would operate as one neighborhood, with shared work and shared resources, but nothing about the ownership of either would change. They had written this down and had it recorded at the county office, because me believed in writing things down. Perry moved into the Ramsey ranch house, which was larger, and they worked out the practical arrangements of a shared life with the same directness they brought to everything else. What was his? What was hers? What was shared? What decisions required both and what could be made alone? It was not seamless. There were mornings when me, who had lived alone for years and who operated on her own schedule and her own habits, had to consciously adjust to the presence of another person in her space. And there were evenings when Perry, who had also been alone a long time, had to learn how to be present without retreating into his own silence. They were patient with each other about this, and they were honest about it, which made it easier than it might have been. The first real test of the marriage came in August, when a drought that had been threatening all summer arrived in full force, and the grass began to brown, and the water levels in the stock tanks dropped, and me was facing the genuine possibility that she might have to sell part of her herd earlier than planned at a price that was not good. She spent 3 days running the numbers in her head and in her account book, and came to a conclusion that she did not want. Perry sat across from her at the table while she showed him the numbers. He looked at them for a long time. "You should sell the southern 23 head now at the current price, before the others figure out what the summer is going to do to the market and the price drops further," he said. "That is what I was thinking," she said. "The Whitfield tanks are deeper," he said. "I have extra water. We can combine the remaining herds on my side of the county road until the rains come and stretch both our hay stores." Me looked at him. This was the offer she had not wanted to need and had not wanted to ask for, not because it was not a good solution, but because it felt like exactly the kind of dependency she had spent years avoiding. She turned it over in her mind, looking at it from all angles, and she realized after a moment that the discomfort was old habit and not current wisdom. This was not dependency. This was partnership. The water was available, the arrangement made sense, and if the positions were reversed, she would make the same offer and would want it accepted without drama. "All right," she said. "I will sell the 23 head Friday. I will start moving the water barriers on Saturday," he said. They got through the drought the way they got through everything together, practically, with the shared effort of two people who understood the specific weight of the thing they were carrying. The rains came in late September, as they usually did, and the land greened up again with the swift generosity of grass that knows what to do when it gets what it needs, and me's remaining herd went into the fall in better condition than she had dared to hope. In October, under the same colors that had presided over her discovery of Perry Carson the previous year, me told him that she was going to have a child. She had confirmed it in her own careful way first, consulting both the town doctor and the almanac of her own body, and she had sat with the knowledge for 4 days before she said it aloud, not because she was not sure of it, but because she wanted to be fully ready for whatever was on the other side of saying it. When she told Perry, she watched his face go through something that she recognized as the full complexity of a person receiving news that is joyful and frightening and enormous and good, all at once. When? He asked. March, she said, or near enough. He reached across the table and took her hand and held it in both of his and looked at her with an expression that she was going to carry with her for the rest of her life, not triumphant, not overwhelmed, just deeply and quietly glad. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am very well," she said. "I am practical about it." "I know you are practical about it," he said. "I am asking if you are all right." She looked at their joined hands and then up at him. "I am scared," she said, which was the honest answer. "I have not done this before." "Neither have I," he said. "That is not reassuring," she said. "No," he agreed. "But we are both people who figure things out when they need to be figured out. This is that." Mae looked at him for a long moment. "Yes," she said. "This is that." She went through the fall and the winter of her pregnancy with the matter-of-fact practicality of a woman who approached everything as a thing to be managed well and not a thing to be made theatrical. She modified her work where she needed to and refused to modify it where she did not. And Perry, who understood by now the precise architecture of her independence, and where it required accommodation, and where it simply required respect, walked that line with her without making it complicated. Clara Bate was present for most of it in the background, riding over with food or conversation, or sometimes both, bringing the practical knowledge of a woman who had borne 2 children herself, and who knew that the best thing you could do for Mae Ramsey was give her honest information and not fuss. Mae was grateful for this in a way she expressed practically. By helping Clara Bate mend a stretch of fence in December despite Perry's quiet suggestion that she might want to take it easy. She mended the fence. Perry helped with the heavy posts. Nobody argued about it. The baby came on a Tuesday in February, 3 weeks before Mae had expected, arriving with the swift decisiveness that she would later recognize as characteristic. It was a boy, which surprised her, though she could not have said what she had expected. Perry was there, had been there through all of it, which Mae had not been entirely sure she would want and turned out to be entirely sure she did. And when the doctor placed the baby in her arms, she felt something that she had not anticipated and could not have named in advance, a love that was entirely different in quality from any love she had felt before, enormous and immediate and without any condition to it. Perry sat beside her on the bed and they looked at the baby together, and the baby was red-faced and clearly opinionated about having been born in the middle of winter, and Perry said, "He looks like he has an argument to make." "Good," Mae said. "That is a useful quality." They named him Daniel for her father, which had been Mae's suggestion, and which Perry had agreed to immediately and without complication. Daniel Ramsey Carson. She kept Ramsey in it because Ramsey was this land and this land was him, which was the kind of name that said something about the people who gave it. Daniel was, from the first weeks of his life, a good sleeper and a poor eater, and then a good eater and a complicated sleeper, and then gradually a child of extraordinary energy and considerable will, which everyone who knew me agreed was to be expected. Perry handled fatherhood with the same quiet competence he brought to everything present, attentive, neither overwhelmed nor disconnected, learning as he went with the same open practicality that Mae had always admired in him. He was good with the baby in the particular way that some men were and others were not, comfortable with the small, vulnerable life of the thing, patient with the crying and the irregular hours and the general unruliness of infancy. Mae nursed and worked and healed and came back to her full stride by late spring, which was when she took on a new contract to supply beef to the growing railroad camp 30 miles east. The Texas and Pacific line was moving through and it needed feeding, and the contract was good and steady, and it required me to expand her operation and hire 2 additional hands. She hired Eli Puckett full-time, which he was grateful for, and a woman which surprised people. The woman was named Rosa Fuentes, 22 years old, the daughter of a Mexican ranchero family from south of the county, who had been working livestock her whole life and who was, me determined after a 2-hour practical assessment, one of the best hands she had seen. People in Dust Creek had opinions about this hiring, and me was aware of their opinions and did not change her decision. Rosa was capable, honest, and hardworking, and me was in the business of running a cattle operation and not in the business of managing other people's limited imaginations. Perry said nothing about the hire except, privately, "Good call. She is excellent with the horses." Me had thought so too. The years that followed settled into the deep, sustaining rhythm of a life that was genuinely built. Not happened into, not fallen into, but constructed with intention, and maintained with effort and enriched over time by the compound interest of people who chose each other every day in the small, ordinary ways that were more meaningful than grand gestures. The Ramsey Carson operation, which was what people came to call it, hyphenating the two ranches in their common understanding, even though the ownership remained distinct, grew through the early 1880s into one of the most productive outfits in that part of the Texas panhandle. The railroad contract held and expanded. The herd quality improved. Perry's Whitfield acreage was developed into a fine horse breeding operation, the gray quarter horse's offspring showing the same deep-chested, calm-eyed quality as their sire, and it turned out there was a market for good horses that was reliable in a way cattle prices sometimes were not. Me and Perry argued periodically, which they had always done, and remained on the same side of every argument after they had finished arguing, which was the thing that mattered. They disagreed about the price of a bull in 1884, and about whether to take on a new section of land north of the Old Canyon Country in 1885, and about the proper response when a neighbor's fence dispute threatened to become ugly in 1886. In all of these cases, they argued honestly and arrived at positions that were usually somewhere between their two starting points and better than either, which was the thing me had come to understand was the proper function of a genuine partnership. Daniel grew from a difficult infant into a lively and observant boy, who spent much of his early childhood following his mother around the ranch, with the concentration of someone determined to understand how everything worked. He was 4 years old when he informed Perry with great seriousness that the south fence needed a new post at the third corner, and Perry had gone and looked and found that it did, and had come back and told me, and she had laughed in the full, clear way she laughed when something genuinely delighted her. "He gets that from you," Perry said. "He gets that from the land," me said. "The land teaches anyone who pays attention." In the fall of 1885, me found out she was expecting again, and this time she was not frightened, though she was still practical. The second baby came in April of 1886, a girl this time, whom they named Iris after the wildflower that filled the pasture each spring in a color so purple it looked painted. Iris was from the beginning quieter than Daniel and somehow more decisive, which was a combination me recognized from herself at the same age, if she understood what her father had told her about it. 2 children in the ranch house changed the texture of things in ways me had not fully anticipated. It was louder and more chaotic and also fuller, in the way that a room with good furniture was fuller than an empty one, not crammed but complete. She managed it the way she managed everything, with schedule and practicality and love that was expressed through competence and presence rather than constant declaration. Perry was an active and engaged father to both children, and me had observed over the years that he was a man who had quietly and completely remade his understanding of what a life could look like, and who had done so not with reluctance but with a kind of deep relief, as though the life he had now was the one he had been moving toward through all the years of moving. Thomas Puckett had healed and come back to full work and stayed on through the years as a steadying presence. Eli had grown into the operation and was now essentially a foreman, which Mae had told him officially in 1885 with the same direct practicality with which she did everything, handing him the title and the raise and saying, "You have been doing the job for a year. I should have said it sooner." Rosa Fuentes had proved herself so thoroughly over 3 years that Mae had made her the primary horse manager in coordination with Perry's breeding operation, which was an arrangement that worked well for everyone, and which Rosa approached with the focused professionalism that had always characterized her. It was a Saturday afternoon in October of 1887, 5 years from the morning Mae had first stood in the yard watching Bessie try to be a working horse, and Perry Carson had appeared at her fence with his hat in his hands. Mae was on the porch, the same porch, the boards now replaced but the structure the same, watching Daniel, who was 6 now, trying to teach Iris, who was 18 months and walking, to throw a stick for the ranch dog, a speckled hound named Fletcher who endured the children's attentions with saintly patience. The evening light was doing the thing it occasionally did, filling the sky with the extraordinary colors that had no name in any catalog. Perry came around from the barn where he had been working on a harness and stopped beside her and looked at the sky. "That one is particularly good," he said. "It is," she said. He leaned against the porch post and watched his children and the dog and the light for a moment. His hand found hers on the railing and she turned hers over to hold his, which was a motion that had become as natural to her now as checking the weather. "I have been thinking," he said. "About what?" she said. "About the North Acreage," he said. "I want to propose something to you and I want you to tell me if it is a bad idea." "I will," she said. "I think we should join the land officially," he said. "Mine and yours into one operation. Not because I think it needs to be mine or combined under my name. I am thinking we put it together as the Ramsey Carson Cattle and Horse Company, filed proper, equal shares, because that is what it already is practically and I think it should be what it is legally." Mae looked at him. She turned the proposition over in her mind with the careful thoroughness she brought to everything. "That is what it already is," she said. "Yes," he said. She was quiet for a moment, looking at the light on the land that her father had stood on and that she had stood on and that her children were standing on right now, Iris having given up on the stick and simply sitting down in the dirt to examine it, which Fletcher thought was an excellent development. "All right," she said. Perry looked at her. "Just like that. You made a good argument," she said, and her voice carried the warmth that it had been carrying in his direction for 5 years. They filed the paperwork at the county office the following Thursday. The clerk, a man who had been present for the recording of Mae's original solo debt payoff and who had been in Dust Creek for 30 years and had watched its people through considerable change, looked at the document and then at both of them and said, with genuine feeling, "That is a fine thing." They went home and worked, because there was always work and work was a good thing. And in the evening Perry made supper because he had been learning to cook for 2 years now with the same patient attention he brought to everything and had gotten quite good at it. And they ate together, all 4 of them, with Fletcher making his case at the door, in the kitchen that had once been only Mae's and was now fully all of theirs. After the children were in bed, Mae and Perry sat by the fire, which was the same fire they had sat by the first evening she had let herself stop being careful with him, the same warmth and the same particular quality of a Texas autumn night pressing at the windows. "Do you know what I think about sometimes?" Mae said. "Tell me," Perry said. "That morning," she said, "when I came out to find the gate open and the cattle gone and Copper lame and nothing going right, I was standing there doing the arithmetic of the situation and it was not a good arithmetic." She paused. "And then you appeared at my fence with your hat in your hands." "I remember," he said. "I told you I was not looking," she said. "You did," he said. "And you said that was fine," she said. "And then you helped me anyway." Perry smiled, the smile that still took years off his eyes and that she had been watching and cataloging and loving for 5 years. "It seemed like the most useful thing I could do," he said. "It was," she said. And then, "Perry, yes. I was looking," she said. "I just did not know what I was looking for yet." Perry put his arm around her and she leaned against him. which was a thing she had been careful to never do in her life before him, and which was now so natural it felt like the most reliable thing in the world. And outside the fires reached the Texas night spread in all directions, enormous and cold and full of stars, and the cattle were settled in the pasture, and the horses were quiet in the barn, and the children were asleep, and the fences were good, and the land was theirs. She had told every man she was not looking. He had said that was fine. And then he had helped her look for her cattle, for the life that was already hers, and without once asking her to change any part of herself, for the one thing she had not known she was missing. The years carried forward from there with the deep, unspectacular beauty of a life that is being genuinely lived. The Ramsey Carson operation grew and settled into itself, the way good land settled after rain, deeper, firmer, more itself. Daniel grew into a boy of considerable capability and irrepressible curiosity, and by the time he was 8, he could read sign on the ground and fix a fence post and handle a gentle horse and do his sums, all of which Mae had ensured and Perry had reinforced without either of them having to discuss it, because they both believed the same things about what a child needed. Iris grew into the girl her name suggested, a flash of vivid color in everything she did, particular in her preferences, entirely unintimidated by her older brother or by anything else. Clara Bate remained Mae's closest friend through all of it, and the two of them rode together on Sunday mornings when their schedules allowed, which was most Sundays, moving through the land they both loved in the comfortable silence of women who had known each other long enough that silence was its own form of conversation. Clara Bates' sheep operation had expanded, and she had hired 2 hands herself, and she ran it with the same steady competence she brought to everything. And if she had not found her own Perry Carson along the way, she seemed genuinely satisfied with her life, and Mae believed her. In 1889, Texas statehood having already been established and the land continuing to fill with people, Mae hired 3 new hands to handle the expanded operation and began keeping the accounts in a double ledger system that the Dust Creek Bank manager told her was more sophisticated than what most operations 3 times her size were doing. She was pleased by this in a private way she did not display. She had always understood numbers, and she had always understood land, and she had always understood cattle, and the intersection of these 3 things was, she thought, the basic architecture of the life she had built. Perry, in the same year, sold 12 horses from the breeding operation to the United States Army at a price that was considerably better than he had expected, the Army being in the market for quality remounts, and the Whitfield horses having developed a reputation in the region for soundness and temperament. He came home from the transaction with a quiet satisfaction that Mae recognized as the particular pleasure of a man who has built something that has been recognized by people who know what they are looking at. "Well done," she said, when he showed her the contract. "We," he said, because she had contributed to the operation, and he was not in the habit of forgetting it. "You built the horses," she said. "On land you water and fence," he said. She held his gaze for a moment with the warmth she had been giving him for years, and that still had, she thought, enough depth in it to last for a very long time. "Well done, then," she said, "both of us." The spring of 1890 brought a new addition to the house, not a baby this time, but a decision that Perry had been thinking about for a long while. He came to me one evening with the plans he had drawn himself, careful and precise, for an addition to the east side of the ranch house that would give the children their own proper rooms and give me the study she had been working from a corner of the kitchen for 8 years. "A study," she said, looking at the plans. "You do accounting for 3 separate operations and correspondence with the railroad and the bank and 2 buyers in Amarillo," Perry said. "You need a room where you can close the door." Mae looked at the plans. She looked at the space they described, a good room, south-facing for the light, with a window that would look out over the pasture. She thought about how it would feel to have a room that was hers in the way her whole life had once been hers, a room with a door she could close and her father's desk in it, and her account books in order, and the particular quality of a workspace that belonged to a person who knew exactly what she was doing. "Yes," she said, "I would like that very much." Perry built it through May and June, with Eli helping when the cattle work permitted, and when it was done, Mae put her father's desk in it, the one that had sat in the main room since she was a child, that she had inherited along with everything else and kept because it was both useful and beloved, and organized her books and papers, and sat down at it for the first time in the finished room, and looked out the south window at the pasture in the July evening. She could see, from that window, the section of fence where Perry had found the heel print and read the latch the morning everything had begun. The post was different now, replaced twice since then, but the ground around it was the same ground, the same Texas clay, the same grass coming through it. She thought about her father saying that the land was what you stood on and love was what kept you from falling over. She had both, now, in abundance. The story of Mae Ramsey and Perry Carson was not a story that Dust Creek told in terms of romance, exactly, because it did not have the shape that people expected romance to have: no rescue, no grand gesture, no woman softened from stubbornness into acceptance. What it had was simpler and stranger and more durable than that. It was the story of two people who had both been through the fire of loss and had come out the other side still recognizably themselves, and who had found in each other someone willing to stand on the same ground without trying to own it. Mae Ramsey had told every man she was not looking. She had meant it every time. She still meant it, in a way. She had never been looking for what men had been offering, which was someone to complete her or save her or give her what she was missing. She had never been missing those things. What she had been missing, without knowing it, was someone who would say, "That is fine," and then help her look for the thing she actually needed. That was Perry Carson's gift to her, offered that first morning at the fence with his hat in his hands and his good horse and his honest eyes. She gave him the same gift back. In her way, said yes to his presence, yes to his honest disagreements, yes to his love, which was the steady and unglamorous and entirely real love of a man who had seen her clearly from the first morning, and had never once tried to make her into something other than what she was. It was enough. It was, in fact, more than enough. It was everything. The summer of 1890 was the finest Mae could remember in 20 years on that land. The rains came in good measure, and the grass was deep, and the cattle were fat, and the horses were magnificent in Perry's pastures, and the children were growing into themselves with a speed that was both ordinary and astonishing. Daniel was 9 and riding his own horse on short-range drives, which Mae watched from a distance with a mixture of pride and the particular species of love that is composed almost entirely of watching. Iris was 4 and had taken an enormous interest in the horses, spending her afternoons at the fence of Perry's pasture, watching the mares with an intensity that reminded everyone of her mother watching a fencing problem. One August evening, near the anniversary of the morning that Mae had found her gate open and her cattle gone, she and Perry rode out north together, just the two of them, the children with Eli's wife who had come to help since the previous spring. And they rode to the coyote shelf above the canyon where she had lain on her belly with her father's spyglass and located the 3 stolen cattle and the yellow duster of Cutter Briggs. They sat on their horses at the rim and looked out over the canyon country in the late light, and the land was as beautiful as it had always been, unchanged by any of what had happened in the years since and utterly indifferent to the human stories it had witnessed. "You know what I remember from that day," Perry said. "Tell me," she said. "When you said I need cattle found, and if you are offering to help find them, I will accept that help and pay you fairly." He paused. "You were so absolutely clear. I thought there is a person who knows exactly what she is and exactly what she needs. That is a rare thing." Mae looked out at the canyon. "And you still came to supper," she said. "I still came to supper," he said. She smiled, the full and easy smile that he had been given for 5 years, the particular privilege of causing. "I am glad you did," she said. "So am I," he said. every day. They rode home through the long summer evening, through the grass and the light and the particular landscape that was as much a part of Mae Ramsey as her own bones. And the ranch came into view with its good fences, and its sound barn and its house with the study window facing south, and the two children visible in the yard chasing Fletcher, who had decided a walk was in order, and the whole of it lay in the evening like something carved out of the best part of the world and kept there. Mae Ramsey had built this life with her own hands, from grief and debt and will, and the particular love she had for this land that had been hers since before she could remember Tennessee. She had built it on her own, steadily and without apology, and she had kept it on her own, and she had added to it not by giving any of it away but by choosing, with full knowledge and full will, to share it. She had told every man she was not looking, and she never had been, for what they were offering. But on a September morning in 1882, with her cattle gone and her good horse lame, a man had appeared at her fence and said that was fine and helped her look, and found in the looking something that neither of them had been looking for, and that turned out to be exactly the thing they both needed. The land held them both. The love kept them standing. And the story, which had begun with loss and ended with everything, was as true as the ground beneath their boots, and as lasting as the grass that came back every spring, faithful and green and undefeated.